the third story that I have for you comes from my past, and it's another story from my remote past, and it happened actually quite some time ago, approximately 5 years before my dad passed away, about 5-6 years before. And so I look upon this context as a very difficult and complicated one, because I was still in the transition from having gone out with my very first boyfriend for around 5 years. And although we were never really considered very seriously involved, I would rate our relationship it's very similar to a junior high romance, if you get my drift. We were always only friends, and we did meet up in university at my campus, and I was immediately overcome by this strange connection. I knew that he was probably from another culture, and he ended up, when I got to know him, it ended up that he was actually born in Cairo and was in my city. He had been there since a child, and he was such an interesting person. He also looks an awful lot like a Hollywood actor, and I am now convinced that they are related through maternal roots. And I mean, this guy is precisely the spitting image of my first boyfriend, and the only thing is, he materialized a good 2 decades after the split. And so it was like deja vu. It really hit me like a ton of bricks when I saw him in a movie. And I thought, oh my God, those are my first boyfriend's legs. That's his face. That's his hair. Everything the same. Anyway, our relationship was a little rocky when we finally decided to call it quits. And actually, we broke up twice. First, it was me that ended up becoming quite angry at him for whatever reason. And I don't want to talk about that because that's not important. It was a typical other girl thing. And so it ended up not being a relationship, but an old friend of his. And so I broke up with him for a good 6 months, and then we got back together. And during that time, we began to talk of marriage. But then the thing is that his parents could not really make a good go of it in my city anymore. It was quite difficult for them, and things at the time were not that very welcoming for people immigrating. Not all the time. It's easier now, I think. But at the time, I remember my boyfriend's father being very unhappy, and he did a stint in the hospital, and it was not a good scene. And I ended up feeling so sorry for the man. And his parents were involved in the jewelry business, and he had one younger and two younger brothers. Sorry, it's been a while since I thought about them, but he was the oldest of 3 boys. And so what ended up happening was that the dad was in the hospital while we were in university, and the mom, mind you, I'd never met his parents, so that was weird. I met his brothers, but not his parents. So it was not a good feeling for me. And I eventually found out why. And here it is, in a nutshell. The mother went to move to LA, California, and she began to look for a home for the family. And so this was done with my gradual knowledge. I wasn't aware of what was going on at first. And with the dad being in the hospital, the three men were left on their own. I remember the youngest was finishing high school, and the other two were in university. And so my boyfriend was 1 year older than me. And so that put me at the same age as his younger brother. And I remember at the time that I first started going out with him, I was too young for the nightclubs. And it would have been the early 80s, late 70s. And so the most popular shows that I can remember and that I adored were Dallas and Three's Company and Little House on the Prairie, and there were a couple of others as well, but I think the other one was Knots Landing. I loved Knots Landing. I loved it almost as much as I would come to love Melrose Place, but that was way ahead of the story now. So anyway, the mother returned and told the three boys, her three sons, that they had to get rid of all their girlfriends. And so I'm not going to go over that. That was devastating for me. But in the end, I realized that breaking up early rather than staying attached to him was better for me. I wanted to move on with my life, and I was still in the middle of university. I hadn't graduated yet. And so it was important for me to try to keep a clear and level head. And it was devastating, guys. It was a tragedy because by that time, he had become such a big part of my life, my daily life. He found work around the corner from my house, and he came to university with me by bus every day. Now, he lived way out of town at that time. There were no running buses between my neighborhood and his. Now there are, but at the time, he would have to hitchhike in order to get to university and then take the bus once he was in the city boundaries. What he must have gone through. But he was right. I didn't think about it. It didn't dawn on me how much of a hardship, especially in the winter, that something like that, a relationship like ours, could have been on somebody who lives so far out of the city. Anyway, he, to make a long and very passionate story short and sweet, they moved away. They eventually moved away 2-3 years after we broke off. And the thing is, guys, that he kept coming back to fulfill his visa requirements. And also, he kept coming back to see me. Can't imagine how much that upset me and irritated me. But at the same time, I was so happy to see him. It felt like an old, familiar, comfortable pair of jeans that I had lost and finally found. I was overjoyed at his surprise visits. But on one of these visits, he started to anger me. And I remember briefly that we went away with my parents and my cousins. And he traveled from California by bus to this tropical resort by bus. And he looked in every hotel for me because we used to travel on standby because of my father's business. And we never knew which hotel we were going to end up being in. That was before we purchased our home there. And so here's the guy going up and down the tourist strip looking in every hotel for us. That was funny. So here's the thing. They moved away. He kept coming back to visit me. At one point, he knew that I had become a very changed person and that I actually had become a little bitter around the edges as far as some relationships were concerned. And when he saw how changed I was, he began to cry. And he told me that it was all his fault that I underwent such a hardship after he left, and that he shouldn't have done it, and that it was all his fault. And me, being the polite thing I am, was rather inclined to agree with him and told him, you know, totally, you're absolutely right. Okay, so here we are now, maybe 5-10 years down the road, and I am in my home abroad with my parents. Now, mind you, we still have our home back in Canada, and this is just a back and forth thing. We were never fully made citizens of the other place, although I could have once I married over there, but I decided to let that opportunity go because I was no longer interested in becoming a citizen. But in between that time, we did purchase a beautiful resort home right on the beach. And it was actually a graduation present from Teachers College from my dad. And actually, sometimes, you know, at Christmas, I almost feel as though my dad is still there handing me out these gifts and costly presents. And I just can't imagine having survived this long without my parents, and especially my dad at Christmas time, his generosity, and my mom too. It really got me here. They came out with such extravagant gifts that it made me feel guilty and ashamed for all the times that I was ticked off at them and yelled at them. It's bringing tears back to my eyes even now. And guys, I'm going to get on with this story later on at home because it's getting late and I don't want to get stuck in driving in the dark. It brings out the worst in other drivers. So I'm going to head on home. So here we are back at home, and I am just dying to tell you this story. I've told it very early on in the first days of my channel, and I really was not as emphatic enough about certain details regarding this particular story. And I think really of all these stories that I have been thinking of and talking about, this has got to be the closest to being an angel story, even more than the Fatima story, the Fatima dream. It's the closest, and to me, very scary, not in terms of precisely what was going on in the dream and what I was doing, but in terms of the real world. And this is incredible. Not a coincidence, not random, not related to anything I was doing or thinking or talking about right beforehand. So, okay, let's go back 30 years, over 30 years now. Yeah, I am an old girl. Now, this is January, the night of January the 16th, 1994, just a couple of years prior to my father's passing. Now, that date precisely coincides with our annual trips to our old home abroad. By then, we had purchased this property on the beach, and it was, we purchased it in '89, and so it was it was an older building, but we had only been there a couple of years. And so I remember that decade as being right after 1989. I can't explain it. A great big change was happening inside of me. A spiritual awareness, not in a religious sense, but when I was at the beach, I felt so in tune and so at perfect peace and harmony with the world and with everyone around me, and myself included. I remember telling you about this period when I explained to some of you about my Maddie McCann dream, but this is different. This is so right on. And I remember being absolutely amazed at what unfolded in this dream and how perfectly matched up in terms of timing and events it actually was. And I don't know how I got the wind of it. A condo on the beach, very close to a Walmart, and we were right on the tourist strip, which is the older part of that tropical resort. A resort in North America, was as close as I can get without telling you any other details. Central and South America. I'm going to throw other countries out there just so that I don't give the real location away. And it was the most incredible resort. And I grew up there. And so I was already pretty comfortable and familiar with the culture and the people and the wonderful, amazing daily routines of beach, dinner, swimming, shopping, and lots of fun and friendships. It was a really magical world for me that opened up only as I started to enter adulthood. And by the time we purchased the condo, I was probably 27, 28 years old. Now at this time, I was just getting into my 30s. And so January the 16th, 1994 was a beautiful, balmy winter night, around 80 degrees. And My parents and I had been dining at an Italian restaurant along the strip, and we finished and made our way by cab toward the Walmart, the local Walmart, so we could pick up some light groceries for our daily meals. Now, when we were done, we made our way home, and I remember that we had a radio in the kitchen as well as a small television set. But I remember going over this detail on the following day with my parents, and they were pretty sure, as well as I did, that nobody turned on the radio or the news on the television set. Nobody listened to anything. My father may have entertained one of his friends from an upper floor who had stopped by for a drink, and that is all that I remember. I do remember feeling some quakes during the day, off and on throughout the trip, every time I went, every time I flew there. Without a question. Nothing major, just like maybe a couple of twinges and then it would be gone. But that day I don't remember if I had felt anything specifically. That detail I can't recall. And I was, getting a little tired. My parents and I were not very, I had difficulty sleeping. But I remember on this evening feeling so refreshed from the walking at night and the light exercise by going to Walmart and putting all the groceries away. It was just a kind of nice, easygoing and relaxed routine that kind of bolsters your spirit, and nothing stressful or anything like that. Now, I remember falling asleep and sleeping throughout the night, most of the night, with an intense and incredibly unbelievable dreams. Because it was just a few years after my friend had come down to see us at this resort before we purchased the condo, I kind of maybe attributed the dream to that vacation, which was around the same time. It was always the same time, guys. Early January, late December, for a good few weeks. And so I assumed that was why I dreamt of him, because for the longest while throughout the night, I was pretty ticked. I didn't want to dream about him. I was upset that I was dreaming about him because I was supposed to be mad at him, right? He really didn't do anything that terribly, drastically wrong, but deep down, I was kind of pissed off at him. That anger kind of held me back from beginning other nice relationships with other nice people. Always at the back of my mind was this guy and what he pulled at the end, which wasn't his fault. He moved to California. And so it wasn't an act of hate or violence. It was just, something, one of those things, one of those changes that we all have to go through at one time or another. And so I remember in this dream, I was a very, omnipotent presence. And I was looking down in a room. It looked to be like a jewelry store, which was actually the business place and trade of his dad. And so I know that as I got closer and circled around the figure who was all by himself at one of the jewelry counters, I could see that it was my old friend. Now, I remember being almost overwhelmed by the same kind of intuitive recognition. It, I don't know how to explain the feeling that I had in my dream when I recognized my friend sitting alone in the jewelry store doing what appeared to me to be some minor adjustments to a piece of jewelry. There was no one else in the store. I had the idea that it was sort of dark outside, and it was the place was not yet open. There were no customers in there. It was all quiet, no street life, nothing. It was just a dim room and him. I remember, I think in reality, I probably woke up around this time, now thoroughly upset with myself for having dreamt of him. And I don't understand why, I didn't at the time understand why I was dreaming about him. And I was surprised that I dreamt of him, and I didn't want to dream of him, guys, because it was over 2-3 years since I had seen him, and it was the relationship, the friendship was gone and over with. And so it would be very difficult for me to move on with my life without these frequent interruptions by him or my dreams about him. So I was understandably upset. And I thought that when I went back to sleep, he would magically disappear. Well, no, I was wrong. I continued to watch what he was doing in my dream from above. Maybe an elevated staircase, a little hallway, who knows? But I was above, and he didn't know I was there. So that is how I perceived the events in the dream. And now, suddenly, in the dream, I hear and see a change, a noticeable and very visible change, and it was very audible as well. I could hear rocks falling, big heavy thuds of furniture crashing, and glass shattering, and little rocks flying through the air, and the walls were considerably shaken up. And I remember that while I was still above, suddenly the room caved in on my friend. And so this is so, it gives me goosebumps. I was automatically transported from the above part of the room down to his level. I stood right beside the area in which he had been trapped. I could hear his voice. Muffled. It was muffled, but I could hear him. And I think he was begging for help. And for a few seconds, everything went pitch black. And I remember trying to remove the debris that had fallen around him and push away the heavy furniture that had collapsed all around him. And when I got to him, I saw that he was tied behind his back. His hands were tied behind his back, and he had a gag on his mouth. It wouldn't be until about 3 years later, after this dream, that I would come to realize how significant that detail actually was. No, they were not robbed. The business was not robbed. He was not kidnapped or abducted. But he was engulfed in a power failure that rendered everything pitch black, and it made his physical position impossible to reach a telephone or a cell phone, whatever have you. I don't even think there were cell phones. I think they were, but those kind of cell phones are not around anymore. So he could not communicate to anybody what exactly was happening to him. And he was all alone, except for me. I was there, and I remember in my dream, I don't know if he finally was made aware of my presence, but I remember untying his hands and taking the gag out of his mouth and moving all that stuff away from him so that he could be free enough to move about and get out of there. And that was the end of the dream, guys. I saw a bright light, and that was the end of the dream. And if there's any message that can be taken away from that dream other than it being a weird and wacky dream that occurred at the same time of the earthquake that actually happened in Los Angeles, California in 1994 on January the 17th, I would have said, well, okay, this dream is probably just trying to tell me I shouldn't be upset with him anymore. He moved on with his life, and that's what I'm doing too. There's nothing to be upset about. But no, somebody up there, somebody made it impossible for me to brush this off as just one of those random dreams, crazy dreams about my past friendships. It wasn't random, guys. That day, I remember waking up and I still thought it was just a dream, one of those weird dreams, so it wasn't that big a deal to me. I went about my day. I went down to the beach with my parents, and over there, they had little huts and cabanas that sold newspapers and tobacco and cold drinks. Not that the building we lived in didn't have that as well, but they were scattered all throughout the beach. And so I remember taking my towel down to the beach and kind of still ticked off that I dreamt about him. And I looked to my left and to my right. I usually did scan the headlines. Sometimes I would buy a paper, and mostly I just didn't care. But sometimes things were important enough that you wanted to know more about what was going on in the world while you were away in a remote destination. And so, but that day, when I saw the headlines, I didn't feel like buying a paper. I felt like running away. And the headlines were screaming all about the earthquake that had just occurred in San Diego around 5-something in the morning, which is around the time that I woke up and went to the bathroom and got ticked off because I was dreaming about him. It was still kind of dark outside. So the timing was right, guys. Maybe a little off, but I think that the actual earthquake and our time difference really coincided. And so I remember doing the calculations before, and it worked out. But these headlines, guys, they scared me. And so, of course, I turned to my parents and started to ask them questions. Did we leave the radio on last night or this morning? Did you turn on the news? No. Did you hear about the quake? Were you talking about it? No, this is the first time we heard about it. I know it's common to dream about something like this while it's actually taking place. But let me ask you, how many people do you really know who actually do this? like on a regular basis. No, maybe not that regular. And so I proceeded to tell my parents, and I don't know if they believed me. I'm sure my dad did, but my mother was always kind of a skeptic. And she maybe thought I was lamenting over him. I wasn't the type. But I remember her being taken aback. But she didn't say much. My father, he really, he couldn't believe what I was telling him. And if it wasn't for the fact that I hadn't opened a paper yet, they probably wouldn't have believed me. You know what I'm saying? But here I am coming from the elevator down to the beach. They know we haven't had any contact with the media. No, nothing. Nothing. Not one sound throughout the night or in the next morning. Nothing. This was all coming about as though I had lived through the earthquake with him back in LA. I saw him, guys, in my dream. Now, eventually, that dream scared me. That, to me, it was more than a dream. It scared me because I don't know what it meant. I still don't know what it means. And every day, you know, every time I see that actor that looks like him, I think about this dream. I think about how scared I was afterwards. And I know that he was a very deeply intuitive person like me. And I think that this dream, even though we were no longer friends or we were permanently apart, I think maybe some people are meant to be soulmates. And I don't mean that in a romantic way. I think that maybe at that time he was thinking about me. He could have been. Hold on, and there's more incredible stuff coming. 2 years later, or maybe 3 years later, after my father's passing, I don't know why I got the notion to call him up, because he was listed and everybody in his family was listed. And I remember telling his brother, please, I don't want to see him anymore. It's very upsetting. I don't want him to come here anymore. He can't do this. I really made it very clear that it was difficult for me to continue to be his friend at that time. And then my father took ill after this dream. And I remember telling his brother before this dream, it's, you know, I don't want him to come here and visit me anymore. That was while we were still at the other house. And he understood. I felt so terrible to be that mean and negative, but I had no choice. It was destroying me. He had always been the type of person who could tell right away if something was wrong, and he would do everything in his power to make it right. He protected me. And when I think back about all the other relationships that didn't go as planned or as I had hoped, and it would be because of that particular point, nobody was as trustworthy as he was in my eyes. And that was for quite a few years. So I remember that day, it was probably the anniversary of my father's passing in September. And I remember it having passed in a very major depressing way. And I think that we had already started legal proceedings against the business partner. And I just couldn't anymore. I had to hear his voice. I had to pick up the phone and just tell him, you know, my dad passed away. I don't know why I'm telling you, but I think, you know, I need to feel grounded. I felt so isolated because everybody in my life at that time was not like him. And I needed that strong support. And in the end, I never really got to talk to him. But I did get to talk to his sweet, wonderful wife, and I was so pleased. And I was surprised, not too surprised, but I was very pleased that she was willing to speak with me. And I felt bad that maybe I had caused something, but I didn't mean anything malicious at all. And you know what she told me? The first thing that she told me, he and I were married in January of 1994. And, okay, January 1994, already my head is buzzing. And she said, do you want to know something? A week before the wedding, he got caught, he got trapped in the earthquake, and he couldn't get out. All the lights went out, and he didn't have a phone nearby. And he had to wait and wait until people finally came to free him. My God, that scared me so much. That was so real. The dream was so close to the reality. I just don't understand how it could have happened as though pieces of my dream were the reality. I didn't tell her about the dream. I didn't want to get him into trouble or maybe she would think I was there. No, I didn't tell her. And so, I don't know what to make of that dream, but I actually was in the dream helping him. In my mind, in my dream, I was there helping him. And did I will that freedom for him, that he could be free and released from his trap, that physical trap that had fallen around him? Probably. And at that point in the dream, that is when I realized that it was stupid and selfish of me to be still that angry and upset with him. There was nothing for me to be angry or upset about. And so that's it, guys. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm still getting scared and goosebumps all over again. It gives me the chills. I wish everybody a very happy and wonderful holiday. Thank you for listening and watching.